All right, welcome to our second installment, Drawing Fundamentals, Linear Perspective 2. So, taking off from our last demonstration, we have recreated the perspective grid. Go back to the first demonstration to get a better thorough understanding of how I built this. One thing that I have changed is that this should look the same, and then I have extended it out so that these 45 degree angles, I have reflected those this way. So now I have essentially created another transitioning plane that is receding to that vanishing point based on 45 degrees, which converge here at this central axis point, and that then again cut across at our horizon line, right? So just as before, up top, we have created a diagonal cutting across this vertical, and all of these intersecting points of these diagonals, these intersecting points now serve to allow us to draw a horizontal line at each intersection, so that we now get our square, as in here, these square tiles diminishing in size as they move towards our vanishing point. We're still doing one point perspective. We're continuing on with this just to kind of give another flush out what we did last time. Again, remember, this is our horizon line, right? Which represents the position of our eye. As though we are looking forward here, right? So that represents the direction of our eye, whether we are standing on the floor, whether we are sitting in a chair, whether we are standing on a box, whether we're laying on the floor to get like a worm's eye view or something like that. That's always, that vanishing point moves with our position as the viewer. So remember that. At this point, let's assume that we are standing and looking out across a flat plane. One maybe film reference you might think about is the old classic from the 80s, Tron. This almost has this sensation of this sort of kind of early digitized worldview, and actually one of the artists that designed a lot of that stuff, Sid Mead, who just passed away, was a brilliant draftsman and a master of linear perspective, and he's worth looking into if you want to do a little research. Anyway, so continuing on, let's say that what I showed you in the books at the beginning of the last session was the idea of the railroad track, or the road moving back into space, right? So why don't we just quickly create that, which is pretty straightforward. Here's our central point here. And I've made all of these lines darker than I did in the last one in hopes that it was going to show up a little better in on this video. And I'm not so sure it's working from here, but we'll keep going. So essentially what happens is that this, we can drop these back in value maybe. We have straight away identified our receding railroad track. These could be our ties on the railroad track. They're already receding. And we've got regular intervals at which they diminish off into space again. As we move further away from our vantage point and move out further and further towards the vanishing point, things get smaller and closer together. So now we've essentially plotted out our road or our railroad track, whatever it's going to be. Remember, again, in this little world, that the main factors that we're dealing with, everything recedes to the vanishing point at a diagonal. Otherwise, we have horizontals and we have verticals. So maybe one thing that we might want to think about is along our road or our railroad track, we will have a fence moving along. So let's try plotting out a fence on here. And again, we'll just arbitrarily say that this is the top of the fence post. If this is the top of the fence post, then all of those tops should line up there, correct? So maybe let's put a fence post on every other horizontal. So let's maybe make those, we'll state those in advance just so that we don't get lost. Let's just take it to there because we haven't really plotted these out, which is fine for the time being. But what we'll do now is line up our right angle, whatever we have. You could use, you could just as well use the corner of a nice sharp corner of a sketchbook or a piece of cardboard as a right angle. And we'll just arbitrarily put one here for the time being. All right, so there we have our fence post. And I suppose if we wanted to give it a little bit of volume, we could run something like that across it. All right. What do we got here? Maybe I'll get some of these out of the way just so that we're getting a sense of our road diminishing off into space. That's dividing our picture up, our lower plane anyway. So I think the next assignment that I want you to think about is how are we going to plot, again, a rectangular form. Let's place it over here. I want you to do one on the side that we are looking at an external view of what we could call a building, maybe an external view. And then I think over here I will create another rectangular form, very basic box-like structure that we're going to take the walls off so we'll be able to see inside of it. Now, with the way we've plotted out a lower plane and an upper plane, we essentially have created quadrants in a sense. You could think of this as like a camera view or the scope. That if you ever look through the scope of a rifle, similar things are happening, right? You've centralized your vision, and you have in effect made 4 quadrants. So different things are going to happen in each of those quadrants. So just keep our eye on that as we proceed. I want you to pay attention to that. So maybe from the outset we will start our building. It's going to be a long, narrow, skinny building. So let's say we want to plot out our floor plan. So let's say, let's go with this, okay? So in effect, this is the ground plan. I'm not going to continue to fill in this at this point, but I suppose just for clarity's sake, let's say that I'm going to draw this lightly because remember, I want this to be a solid form. I don't want it to be like the glass, or a transparent cube from the last demonstration. I want this to be an opaque solid form. So what we're going to do now is go from this point, and this point, and we're going to draw verticals. And I want to cut across this quadrant, this lower left quadrant, and draw it straight up and through this upper left quadrant. And I want those verticals to be as precise as I can get them. I want this angle to be a 90-degree angle, so I'm going to slow down and try to make that as clear as I can. Maybe I'll bring it as far as that. That should be all right. All right, so what I've just described essentially is our front facing plane of this big rectangular form that I'm about to describe further. So now we've got this angle, which is going to be the front face, the face facing our road and our fence. Going this way and receding off back into that, distant to that vanishing point. And so let's say we've decided on that point right here.
Powering off.
We've decided that's going to be the end of our building. So remember now, from this point, we want this, we're doing verticals, we're doing horizontals, which is this front plane. This side face is now going to have verticals, but instead of horizontals, we've got diagonals receding back to the vanishing point again, right? So let's go from here and we'll connect to that to our vanishing point. And we've now just described the front or the road facing plane of our rectangular form. And because this is a solid object, I'm not going to completely obliterate all of these lines. I just want to drop them back so that we can see what we're dealing with here. All right, we can probably get rid of this one too if we wanted, just to clarify what we're doing here. So hopefully that's reading as a large rectangular shape. Let's leave our horizon line because that is the far distant plane. Right, so hopefully that's clear as our opaque solid object. And so now's a good time to maybe try and do a similar shape, but let's do something a little more transparent, at least so we can start to see the interior of that object. All right, I don't know, just for sake of switching it up a little bit, I'm going to start with a different ground plan. I'm going to go from here to, let's bring that out a little further, maybe say to here. And I'll leave this up to you guys, but I'm going to continue. I'm going to maybe take it back as far as we've got this one, just so these are lined up with one another. So let's say that we're going to bring it across to there. All right. So again, we've got our horizontal, and we've got our verticals. All right. I don't know, just for sake of, again, switching it up, maybe let's take it a little bit higher than this one. Let's try to get this stuff be precise as we can at the outset. All right, and we will call this the top of our form, our rectangular form, which in this case is representing a building. All right, we've already determined that this is the far end. So now we've got another front facing the road. And we are going to state the edge of that far wall. Remember, so here is, those are the front corners of our facing plane. This this front plane is now receding back towards the vanishing point. So we want to connect from here, not to here, not anywhere else. It is always receding back to the vanishing point, okay? And we will take it as far as that. We can re-emphasize this just to make it a little darker so that we... Okay. So maybe just also for clarity's sake, we are talking about wanting to see an interior. So let's, this is then our floor plane, our ground plane. This is going to serve as the far corner of the back wall, that wall, and that far distant wall. All right, so I've extended beyond this, and let's get rid of some of this stuff on the floor here. Drop it back a little bit. This is the corner between facing wall and the ceiling. So we now have this intersecting point here. And let's say that that distant wall at least is opaque. And that the roof is opaque. Right? So now we're looking into this box. Let's say that that back wall, the wall that is opposite the side of the road, is also opaque. All right. So now one of the things that I want you to think about next is what happens on the inside of this space. So this is similar if you're anywhere near or have seen the construction site of a high-rise building and you're standing down on the ground, you're going to see all of the floor planes exposed. And as they go up, you're effectively seeing each of the floors doing something like this, correct? So as you're looking, this is my eye line. So this is a pretty low building, right? Really what's gonna happen is if I wanna be able to go inside this building, I don't wanna bump my head going in, so maybe I will have to have my ceiling, even this would be a low ceiling. But if we were to walk in, at least we wouldn't bump our heads going into this space. So maybe just for sake of being able to show you these, let's call this our ceiling, and that this is going to be our interior space. So what I'm going to want you to do is think about drawing an exterior of a building and drawing an interior space. All right. So we're looking into the face of this, into the space of this building now. So from here, we want it to move at a diagonal, and it's going to recede as usual towards our vanishing point. Oops. That's a little overstated. Let's drop that back. All right. Now if we want to draw also where this ceiling plane meets that distant wall. So that's going to be horizontal, cutting across this way. And to finish off that, we need another corner of where the ceiling meets the wall, and that's going to be an intersection between those two planes. Remember, this is an opaque, that's a floor. People are standing on top of that maybe. Or maybe it's a little storage unit. We can put things up there. So what I want you to pay attention to in this situation is this ground plane and the relationship between this plane, this plane, we're now seeing the bottom of it, and even further up the ceiling plane, which is even further up. So now maybe what we want to do is have maybe a window on this far wall over here, and we can look out across the horizon. We can see through the window to the distant horizon line. So at this point, what I'm recommending is just making things up. I think what I want you to try to think about is how can you have solid planes and opened up spaces? How can you start to cut holes through these planes? How can you start to make other sections opaque where you would want them not to be see-through anymore? Like for example, maybe our upper floor, this wall, we are going to have that be a solid wall so you can't see through to that upper level anymore. So now we have this opening. Now we've got a rectangular form that is essentially closed on the bottom and on the sides, and we're looking back through into that space. This space is still essentially transparent on this plane and this plane, and we have just decided that this plane is going to be solid or opaque. This plane, solid or opaque, and that one is solid or opaque. So let's put a window in here. And again, I'm arbitrarily going to place it, put a fairly large window in here. And I want it to be, leave a little space from the corner of the wall. And then maybe I want it, let's see here. Let's plot that in first and see where we get to. All right, and I'm gonna just say that's another arbitrary decision. I'm putting the top of the windowsill there. And we're going to say that the window spans the length of that wall to maybe here, okay? Another arbitrary decision in this case. So what I want to do is we've decided this is the lower windowsill. This has to diminish off into the distance towards the vanishing point. Nowhere else, everything diminishes towards the vanishing point. This will also move towards the vanishing point. And there's our window cut into that wall, in which we can see through it to the distant horizon here, right? Now that's all well and good for a start if our walls are as thin as cardboard. You know, they're just like edge thin. But let's say, for example, that we want each of these walls to actually have some thickness to them. I suppose in that case we would have to describe these walls as having a thickness, I don't know, let's say that wide. All right, so now we've got a wall that's got a thickness to it, maybe made out of brick, maybe made out of a concrete slab. So that, now the problem we